especially the work that you did with domestic workers. So why don't you tell a little bit about your background and how that came about? And actually, because you actually, through your efforts and the efforts of a lot of workers, you're actually able to make actual tangible change here in Massachusetts. So tell us about that.
Okay, so I am an attorney, and I had kind of gone the traditional attorney's route, and I went to a law firm, and I was working there, and then the recession hit, and I lost my job. So that's where my journey begins, with the recession. And I had remembered that when I was a kid, I really, really, really wanted to be Thurgood Marshall. I had always wanted to be an activist as a child, but law school sometimes beats it out of you. Not because the theory isn't great, but because the debt is obnoxiously huge. And so my goal was to try and pay off some of it, work at a firm for a little bit, and then see what happens. And well, I got laid off. And what I did is I ended up volunteering in this worker center, the Brazilian Immigrant Worker Center. And I, in the process, set up my new office in the kitchen with 2 cardboard boxes and began doing intake. And I began meeting amazing people, hardworking people who had really just, all they wanted was an opportunity to just shine and do what they could, but due to our immigration system and due to our systemic racism and sexism that we've been dealing with, they were being shut out. And so I started a clinic, the nation's first legal clinic for domestic workers, because a lot of the people who were coming to the Brazilian Immigrant Center were women workers, women immigrant workers who would come in and basically say, I have not been paid for 3 weeks, and I don't know where to go. And my employer happens to be this local millionaire who could afford to pay me.
Of course he is.
Of course he is. Of course he is. But he's decided that instead if I ask for my paycheck one more time, he's threatening to have my kids deported.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Or a lot of the women were coming in saying, I can't go to the hospital, but I'm like 4 months pregnant. Because the woman who owns my cleaning schedule, who tells me where to clean, says if I go to the doctors, I'm going to lose my job. Or there are women who came in and they're like, yeah, listen, my family, that's what they call their employers, just found out I'm gay. And that's definitely not part of their lifestyle choice. They feel that they have a Christian home, and therefore, like, who I am, despite me caring and loving for their children for years, is just not good enough. And so I'll be a bad influence, so I'm losing my job. And so, like, being trained as a lawyer, at the time, I went to the law. Because I was like, this is disgusting, this is wrong, this should be very obvious and easy fix. So I will stand up for you and give you those free legal services. And so this is 2011 to 12. And unfortunately, the law was very, very clear. That was all legal. Right? No. So, yeah. Yeah, it was perfectly legal. Domestic workers were excluded from our discrimination protections. They were excluded from a lot of protections, from OSHA, from everything. And you should know, just a quick history note, that was intentional. That was systemically intended in the 1930s with the New Deal that came down. 2 sets of workers were excluded from protection. Farm workers and domestic workers. That was a deal cut by southern states to pass the New Deal. So who was doing that work in southern states at the time? Right, black people. And so we were still dealing with a vestige of slavery all the way into 2011, 12, and 13. And I'm hit, like, you're not really trained how to deal with vestiges of slavery as an attorney necessarily, right? And so what I became at the time, now I know what they call it, I became a movement lawyer. I was in the training for movement lawyering. And so it was like, cool, all right, so the courthouse is failing my clients. I would go into courthouse and the judge would respond to me when I'm saying she hasn't been paid for all the time she works. She does overnights, Your Honor. She's not getting paid per hour. She's not getting anything, actually. She's actually losing money working for this family. She lives there, yes, Your Honor, but she needs to get paid. They would respond, counsel, nap time isn't work time. Yeah, nap time isn't work time. It doesn't count. She's not really engaged with the child, counsel. Are you sure that's really work? Why should they have to pay for that?
Yeah, she'll leave the kid, right?
Yeah, leave the kid. It's not. It was the vestige of slavery added to the total devaluation of women's work. Yeah. Right? That caring for somebody is not hard, it's not skilled, it's not valued. That's what we were up against. And that's why you couldn't just take it case by case. It had to be a movement that we had to build. And we were part of the Massachusetts Coalition for Domestic Workers. Yeah. We had a convention, actually, talking about history and, the whole Tea Party. We had a convention in 2012, we had 100 domestic workers come together, and we basically said, we will declare what is dignified work for us. And from that, we had a whole list of things, and that's how we created the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights that the convention produced. And we took that and we began organizing, and in between that, I decided if the law isn't working, I can't go to the courthouse, then I guess I'm gonna have to go to the streets, which is what I did. So I began organizing protests outside the millionaires' homes that didn't pay my names. Yeah, because I was like, well. Again, law school doesn't really train you to do that, but when I realized I'm trying to get my client who's undocumented and scared to death and who's been either sexually harassed, touched inappropriately, underpaid, and told that she is nothing, and I'm expecting her to stand in front of a judge and jury that's going to judge her due to racism and xenophobia and so on and so forth, the least I can do is scream with her at the same bastard who didn't pay her. And so that's what I would do, and then her voice was really becoming developed, and then we would go to court, and all of a sudden, because of shame, which works against rich, very powerful people, because the system, sometimes the court system really doesn't, right? If you're suing someone for $2,000 and they have $10 million in the bank, they thought it was funny. I would get like laughing notes back when I would send a demand letter. They would return back. They thought it was hilarious that I was suing them for such small amounts of money. But they were really embarrassed when I went outside their house with a sign. So they would settle very, very quickly. And so that's what we began to do. We began to see beyond the courthouse, and then we began to see beyond like the system, what is actually causing this oppression. Long story short, the law comes in, and we pass it in one session. And this is a movement. This is a movement really led by working class women, pink collar jobs, care workers, immigrant women, women of color, and we also organized employers here in JP, in Brookline, in Newton, because it was just as much as their movement as it was the workers. Just like when we're talking about anti-racist work, it's just as much the work of white people as it is people of color to be at the table to ask those difficult questions. But it's true, because if at the end of the day all we did was create a wonderful piece of paper of which a person who already is devalued and doesn't have a voice feels that she now has to enforce, then we really didn't do anything but add one more thing to do for her. And the question really is, how are we actually creating a movement and a better consciousness? And so that's part of the movement that I'm part of to this day. I'm an implementation coordinator. I was the campaign coordinator for that bill, became a lobbyist for it, really learned how to navigate in the State House. And so that kind of pathway and getting that done in one session, I learned Portuguese and Spanish on the job. I learned how to really begin to navigate in society. I went back to school, got a second law degree, because now we're looking for jobs for care workers. So I'm trying to set up care cooperatives in which we are providing affordable childcare to those very same employers, but in a way that is, sustainable, that pays good wages and is actually affordable by working families. And so, yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Don't apologize. You're kicking ass. I'm not.
Okay.
So we're almost out of time here, though. But the most important thing is you are running for state senate.
Yes.
Give like a minute pitch of. One, obviously, if you are down, you're going to vote for it, right? Obviously, right? Duh. So just how can they help out? How can they find out more about your campaign?
So the 1 minute pitch is basically, I've been part of movement building, I've been part of coalition building, I've helped to pass legislation, and I think of all of the folks running, I'm the only one who's gotten that kind of progressive, massive legislation pushed through in one session. And that speaks to not only being progressive and unapologetically so and inclusive, but also being effective, right? And thinking beyond and thinking creatively. So that's why I'm running. I think I'm taking my advocacy to scale by being a senator. I think it's important for activists to seriously consider that. Yes, the system is broken, and yes, in many cases it's corrupt. But it takes people getting into it and to demand more. I think it's important that you really consider that, and it's really hard for us on the left not to be cynical. It really is. But I think about the times I went to the streets, and I think about the legislation that we got passed to keep me going. And so for those of you who are interested in the campaign, the website's lydiaforsenate.com, very simple. You can go there. We have a Facebook page. You can volunteer. We have door knocking. I will say this, what we don't have in funds, which we have some, we have in 60 committed volunteers who are multilingual, who are all over. Some are here. Some are here from Winthrop, and I mean we're grassroots. We're 100% grassroots. I'm out there all the time. I'm door knocking literally up until now,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna keep doing it. I have taken a leave from my job to put everything I can into this, and I would love for your support to come out to learn more about me.
Give it up for Lydia Evans, everybody.